Welcome to the Methodist Conference 2025 that was held in Telford between the 26th of June and the 2nd of July. The conference is the governing body of the Methodist Church and meets annually to discuss matters affecting the life of the Church, the nation and the world. On Saturday, the 28th of June, the new President and Vice President of the Conference for 2025-2026 were inducted. The President is the Reverend Richard Andrew, Chair of the Darlington District, and the Vice President is Matthew Forsyth, a local preacher and steward. He is the mission team leader in the Northampton Methodist District. In their addresses, they spoke of their theme, Our Story, Our Song, Learning to Live Again, and how each and everyone's stories intermingle with the calling of the Methodist Church as a growing, inclusive, evangelistic and justice-seeking church.
The church will be different, but also somehow the same. This is our story. This is our song.
21 presbyters and 3 deacons were received into full connection. Another 5 presbyters were received by transfer and a further 2 by reinstatement. The ordination of new presbyterial and diaconal ministers is a highlight of the conference, and after the service of reception into full connection, the ordinands travelled to places of worship around Telford to be ordained, watched by family and friends. As in recent years, the budget approved by the conference is in deficit. This is in part due to a conscious effort to use historic reserves for the missional work of the Church. In addition, £12 million is being allocated from the Connectional Priority Fund across a range of initiatives as we strive to become a growing, inclusive, evangelistic and justice-seeking church. However, the deficit is also because the district assessment has been cut over recent years without reductions in expenditure to match. By 2028, this mismatch in income and expenditure will no longer be affordable, and the Executive Director of Finance and Resources reported that consultation was already underway with representatives from the districts to address the issue. The conference also agreed additional connectional funding for the trustees for Methodist Church purposes, which in turn will lead to a reduction in their charges on funds held locally. The conference confirmed the re-invitation of the Secretary of the Conference, the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Hustler, from 2026 for another 5 years. The conference representatives voted overwhelmingly in favour of the re-invitation. The President of the conference paid tribute to Dr. Hustler's deep faith and dedicated service. The conference heard from Sam Monahan, the Chief Executive of MHA, Methodist Homes, a charity founded by the Methodist Church to help people live well in later life. Mr. Monahan explained how they are finally getting back to pre-pandemic levels of occupancy in their homes and workforce efficiency, but said that there remains much still to do for MHA to face the future on strong foundations. He invited the conference and wider connection to be part of what comes next for the organisation and to take part in MHA Sunday, which generally happens on the second Sunday in June. The conference agreed to revise the Church's authorised liturgies. This decision sets in motion a major project to equip the Church with new and revised liturgical resources available in a wide variety of formats, including digital and printed versions. The first stage of the process is to consider the style and language to be used in the resources in order to enable the Church's worship to be as inclusive as possible, in line with the conference's commitments in its strategy for justice, dignity and solidarity. Should the 2026 conference adopt the report, the expectation is that the first new liturgies to be commended for experimental use will be brought to the conference of 2028 and formally authorised in 2030. In their report, the Methodist Youth President B. Hume considered how the voices of the young people they have heard are calling for the Church to be more accessible for those who are neurodiverse or unfamiliar with church culture. The conference urged circuit local preachers' meetings to consider how they can involve children and young people in the planning and execution of acts of worship, and recommends that circuits and districts bring together dispersed youth populations, especially in rural communities, for activity-based sessions. The conference received a report from the Methodist Forces Board highlighting the work of those who minister to the women and men of His Majesty's Armed Forces throughout the UK and around the world. The report calls upon the Methodist Church to support its military chaplains to achieve the objectives of the Forces Board, as the global security situation gives serious cause for concern. The Beckley Lecture was given by Anthony Reddy, Professor of Black Theology at the University of Oxford. Speaking to a packed auditorium, Professor Reddy spoke of a post-colonial critique of British Methodism in a lecture entitled "Whiteness is the Sea, Not the Shark." Conference representatives heard from the Secretary of the Faith and Order Committee, the Reverend Dr. Mark Rowland, that the conference last considered its position on assisted dying in 2015. In light of the bills going through various parliaments in the UK, the conference agreed to establish a working group to review the conference's position, directing the group to report back to the conference no later than 2028. The conference report, Healing Ministry and Neurodiversity, highlighted the importance of being reflective and sometimes self-critical in relation to healing prayer, both for the person praying and the person being prayed for. The conference asked for further work to consider how the Church might express appropriate repentance for the past exclusion of neurodiverse people in the life of the Church, and to explore how the Church might be more inclusive of neurodivergent people, as well as to address ableism in the Church. The conference also directed consideration for more resources relating to healing ministry in general. The report of the Stationing Review Group asserted the need for significant changes in the processes governing the stationing of ministers within the Methodist Church. The recommendations arose from a comprehensive review of existing practices. The report was received by the conference, but it referred the proposals for a new process for matching presbyters with circuit appointments to the Ministries Committee, directing that a further report is brought to the 2026 conference. The conference received an update on Hope in God's Future from the Director of Environmental Engagement, Dr. Hamish Leash. Dr. Leash told the conference that the 2011 statement had served its purpose well, but was in need of revisiting and developing to acknowledge the changes in scientific and theological understanding. The conference agreed that a steering group should be appointed to review and update the text by 2027. The conference heard that more resources will be created to encourage churches to carry on the work, to aspire to achieve net zero by 2030. The conference sets aside time each year for members to confer on one of the 5 justice priorities, discerning where God is acting for justice within the priority areas and conferring on how best the Methodist Church can join in. This year, representatives were invited to confer on priorities for justice for refugees and asylum seekers, looking at the current situation facing refugees. Representatives were asked to reflect on questions including how might your church be supported to provide a better welcome to refugees and asylum seekers, and how should the Methodist Church be using its voice and power for justice for refugees and people seeking asylum. At the end of the session, representatives were invited to share their thoughts. The Methodist Conference elected the Reverend Mark Slaney to serve as President and Caroline Stead to serve as Vice President. They will start their year of office when the representative session of the Methodist Conference opens in Telford in June 2026. Mark is chair of the Scotland District and the Shetland District, and Caroline is the Synod Secretary for the Yorkshire West District. Through a notice of motion, the conference was asked to endorse a World Council of Churches statement Palestine, which calls for an end to apartheid, occupation and impunity in Palestine and Israel. The conference heard from Deacon Angelina Kaiser, who was previously a mission partner in Palestine. Later in the morning, conference representatives wearing red gathered to show their support for the Red Line campaign, which is highlighting the number of humanitarian laws that have been broken in Gaza. The conference ended with a communion service and was adjourned until Conference 2026, which will again be held in Telford.